February 6th, 1935, 9:40 p.m., West 126th Street, Harlem. Snow had stopped an hour earlier, but the sidewalks were still wet, reflecting street lamps like broken glass. Traffic was thin. Too thin. The kind of quiet that didn't belong on a Friday night. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of a black Packard and adjusted his coat. He wasn't alone. Two men stayed near the car, scanning corners, counting windows. This was supposed to be a simple meeting, 10 minutes, no noise, no reason for guns. That was the lie. Inside the Lafayette Social Club, the lights were already on. Music played softly, deliberately casual. A bartender wiped the same glass twice, eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. Upstairs, 3 men waited in a back room with their coats still on. They had planned this for weeks. The idea was clean. Lure Bumpy into neutral territory, cut off his exits, and force him into a corner where he couldn't talk his way out. No public shooting. No witnesses screaming. Just a fast private end to a problem that had become expensive. The men behind the plan weren't impulsive. They were methodical. They'd paid off a lookout on the block. They'd timed police patrols. They'd chosen a night when snow would muffle footsteps and hide blood. And they had one final advantage. Someone Bumpy trusted had told them he'd come alone. The door opened. Bumpy stepped inside. For the first 3 seconds, nothing happened. The music didn't stop. The bartender didn't freeze. A man laughed near the card table like this was any other night. Then the trap closed. The front door locked behind him, not slammed, clicked. Subtle. Final. 2 men rose from the back, hands already inside their coats. Another shifted near the stairs, blocking the only clear path out. Upstairs, a chair scraped softly, someone moving into position. This was the moment, the point of no return. The plan was simple. Force him upstairs, corner him in the back room, end it quietly, dump the body after midnight. By morning, Harlem would wake up confused, scared, and leaderless. That's what was supposed to happen. But something went wrong immediately. Bumpy stopped walking. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't ask questions. He smiled. Not wide. Not arrogant. Just enough. And that smile broke the rhythm of the room, because smiles don't belong in traps. He looked at the bartender first. Then the man near the stairs, then, finally, the 2 men blocking the back. "You locked the wrong door," Bumpy said calmly. One of the men hesitated just half a second. Barely visible. That half second mattered. Bumpy's eyes shifted, not to the gunman, but to the ceiling. A sharp crack echoed above them. Plaster dust fell like snow. Then another crack. The music stopped. Someone cursed. A chair overturned upstairs. This wasn't part of the plan. The men in the room exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" Before the sentence finished, the upstairs window shattered inward. Glass exploded across the floor. A body hit the stairs hard, tumbling down in a tangle of limbs and coats, a gun skidding free across the wood. The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, footsteps, panic. Bumpy didn't move. He stepped backward, slow and deliberate, toward the bar, eyes tracking every man in the room. Whatever they had planned, whatever advantage they thought they had, it was gone. Because traps only work when the target doesn't know they exist. And Bumpy Johnson had walked in, knowing exactly where every tooth was hidden. As guns came out and men scrambled for cover, one question hung over the room, louder than the noise. Who told him? The man who broke first wasn't upstairs. He was 2 blocks away, standing in a cold hallway that smelled like boiled cabbage and damp wool. staring at a cracked mirror he didn't recognize anymore. His name was Eli Rosen. Eli wasn't a killer. He wasn't a strategist. He was a numbers man, ledgers, collections, quiet arrangements. For 7 years, he'd been the one who made sure envelopes reached the right hands on time. Rent paid, debts smoothed over, problems delayed, if not solved. That's why Bumpy trusted him. Eli adjusted his tie again, even though no one was watching. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He pressed them flat against the sink, breathed once, then again. In the bedroom behind him, his wife Ruth sat on the edge of the bed holding a folded coat in her lap. She hadn't put it on yet. She was waiting to see if he'd tell her they didn't need to run. Their son, Daniel, 6 years old, slept in the next room with a fever that hadn't broken in 2 days. Eli had promised Ruth he'd be home before midnight. That promise was already dead. Earlier that afternoon, Eli had been cornered behind a tailor shop on Lenox Avenue. No shouting. No threats shouted into the street. Just 3 men close enough that he could smell tobacco and winter sweat. They knew everything. His routes, his accounts, his son's school, the pharmacy Ruth used. One of them had shown him a photograph. Daniel asleep, mouth open, fever flushed. Taken through the apartment window. "Tonight," the man had said quietly. "He walks into the Lafayette, he doesn't walk out. Or tomorrow your wife plans a funeral." Eli had nodded because nodding was easier than screaming. That was the bargain. Betrayal wasn't ideological for Eli. It wasn't ambition. It was arithmetic, 1 life versus 2. Fear written out in columns he couldn't balance. He had told them Bumpy would come light. No entourage, no show. He'd told them which door, which time, which floor. He had believed, needed to believe, that once it was done, it would be over. That Bumpy would be gone, and no one would trace the leak back to a man who only moved paper. But standing in that hallway, hearing distant sirens drift toward 126th Street, Eli understood the mistake. This wasn't quiet. This wasn't contained. The plan wasn't ending, it was unraveling. Ruth finally stood. "Eli," she said softly, "what's happening?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. At that moment, a sharp knock hit the apartment door. Not frantic, measured, 2 knocks, pause, 1 more. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs. Ruth didn't move. She just looked at him, eyes searching his face for an answer he couldn't give. Another knock. Eli crossed the room slowly, every step heavy, every breath loud in his ears. He placed his hand on the doorknob and felt how cold the metal was. On the other side stood Louis Carter, one of Bumpy's runners. Young, sharp-eyed. Coat still dusted with glass. Louis didn't point a gun. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "You missed something." Eli swallowed. "What?" Louis leaned in just enough that only Eli could hear him. "You told them he'd come alone," Louis said. "You didn't ask why he agreed so fast." Eli's knees weakened. Because the truth, the thing Eli hadn't considered, was this. Bumpy Johnson didn't walk into rooms blind. He walked in already knowing who was scared enough to lie. Louis stepped back, giving Eli a choice that felt heavier than a sentence. "You can come now," he said, "or you can wait. But either way, this isn't over." Behind Eli, Ruth clutched the coat tighter, finally understanding that whatever line had been crossed couldn't be uncrossed. And Eli knew with sick clarity that surviving tonight might cost him something worse than his life. Could he still choose loyalty after selling it once, or was survival already too expensive? Eli Rosen didn't put on his coat. That was the first mistake. Louis Carter noticed immediately. He didn't comment. He just turned and started down the stairs, assuming Eli would follow. For 3 steps, Eli stayed frozen in the doorway, listening to his son cough in the other room. Each sound landed like a verdict. When he finally moved, it wasn't because he'd found courage. It was because standing still had become unbearable. They walked in silence. No cars followed. No sirens chased them. Harlem felt suspended, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. "You could still disappear," Eli said suddenly. Louis didn't slow. "You wouldn't make it past the river." "That's not what I meant." Louis stopped at the corner, turned and looked at him fully for the first time. "Then say what you mean." Eli exhaled. "If I talk now, if I tell him everything, my family dies." Louis studied him, measuring. "And if you don't?" Eli didn't answer. Because that was the question tightening around his throat. Not if someone would pay, but who? They reached a narrow storefront 3 blocks from the Lafayette. Lights off, metal gate half lowered. Inside, the air smelled of gun oil and wet coats. Men stood in clusters, voices low, movements sharp. No one sat. This wasn't celebration. It was triage. Bumpy Johnson stood near the back wall, his coat unbuttoned, a small cut above his eyebrow already drying. He was listening to someone speak, really listening, head slightly tilted, eyes steady. When Eli stepped inside, the room changed. Not dramatically, no shouts, no guns raised, just attention. Bumpy turned. Eli had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the last hour. He'd rehearsed explanations, partial truths, carefully trimmed confessions. None of them survived the look Bumpy gave him, not anger, not shock, recognition. "You look tired," Bumpy said. The understatement cracked something in Eli's chest. "They threatened my boy," Eli said quickly, too quickly. "I didn't have time." Bumpy raised a hand. The room went still. "Who?" he asked. Eli hesitated. This was the fulcrum, the place where weight shifted and something broke. Because names didn't just explain the past, they determined the future. Before Eli could speak, another man entered from the side door, breathless, coat torn. "They're gone," he said. "The upstairs crew scattered, 1 dead, 1 limping bad." Bumpy nodded once. "Good." He turned back to Eli. "You left something out earlier," he said calmly, "when you told them I'd come alone." Eli's mouth went dry. "Why did you think I would?" Bumpy asked. The room leaned in. Eli realized then what the trap had really been. Not the locked doors, not the guns, the assumption that fear made people predictable. "I thought," Eli swallowed, "I thought you trusted me." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "I did." That was worse. Silence stretched. Somewhere outside, a car backfired and half the room flinched. Then Bumpy did something no one expected. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Eli sat. Bumpy crouched slightly so they were eye level. "You have a choice now," he said, "and you don't have much time to pretend you don't." Louis shifted his weight. A man near the door tightened his grip on his coat. Bumpy continued. "You can finish what you started. Tell me everything, names, money, routes. Or you can protect them. Keep quiet. Walk back to your apartment and hope fear keeps you alive longer than truth." Eli's vision blurred. If he talked, the men who'd threatened his family would retaliate. If he didn't, Bumpy would assume the worst. Either way, someone was coming for him. "Why?" Eli whispered. "Why give me a choice?" Bumpy stood. "Because traps fail for different reasons," he said. "Sometimes because they're sloppy, sometimes because Someone inside them decides who they really are. Eli realized the twist wasn't coming later. It was coming now. And whatever he said next would decide not just who survived, but what kind of man he'd be remembered as, if at all. Could a betrayal committed under fear be undone or only paid for? Eli opened his mouth. And then the room exploded. Not with gunfire, worse. A scream tore through the storefront from the back hallway, high, panicked, cut short. Every head snapped toward the sound. Louis moved first, gun out, already running. 2 men followed. A crash echoed. Wood splintering, a body hitting a wall. Someone shouted a name that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Bumpy didn't move. He watched Eli. "Speak," he said quietly. Eli's hands came up, palms open, shaking. "They're not done," he said. "This wasn't the end. The Lafayette was a test." Bumpy's eyes narrowed a fraction. "A test for who?" "For you," Eli said, "and for me." Another thud from the hallway, then footsteps, fast, uneven, retreating. Louis reappeared in the doorway, breathing hard. "Messenger," he said. "No gun, just a note." He held up a folded piece of paper between 2 fingers like it might burn him. Bumpy took it, unfolded it once. Read. His jaw tightened. Not in anger, but calculation. "Read it," someone said. Bumpy handed the note to Louis without comment. Louis read aloud. His voice went flat halfway through. "You survived the room? Good. That was the easy part. You have 1 hour to deliver Eli Rosen to the corner of 138th and Amsterdam. Alive, alone, or his family disappears before morning." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Every man in the room understood the message immediately. This wasn't about killing Bumpy anymore. This was leverage. They wanted Eli not dead, but walking. Public. Proof that fear still worked. Eli's legs gave out. He slumped forward in the chair, elbows on knees, head in his hands. "They told me this might happen," he whispered. "They said if the first plan failed, you'd still trade me." Bumpy studied him. "You assumed I would. Wouldn't you?" Eli looked up, eyes red. "1 man for a war you don't need?" That was the twist. Not the ambush, not the betrayal. The realization that Eli had never been the target. He was the currency. Bumpy turned to the room. "Clear it," he said. No one questioned him. Men filed out quickly, taking weapons, locking doors behind them. Within seconds, only 4 people remained. Bumpy, Eli, Louis, and an older man everyone called Mr. Finch, who'd been silent all night. Finch leaned on his cane. "They're forcing your hand," he said. Bumpy nodded. "They think so." Eli laughed weakly. "You see, this is bigger than loyalty, bigger than me." Bumpy crouched again, face level with Eli's. "Tell me their names." Eli hesitated, then stopped himself. "It won't matter," he said. "You won't use them." "Why not?" "Because if I talk," Eli said, "you can't give me up. And if you don't give me up, they kill my family." Louis looked away. Bumpy straightened. He paced once, twice, each step measured. Then he stopped. "You still think this is about choosing sides," Bumpy said. "It isn't." He turned to Louis. "Bring the car," Louis blinked. "Now?" "Now." Eli's head snapped up. You're taking me?" Bumpy didn't answer. The drive was short and silent. Snow began again, light but steady, blurring the streetlights into halos. No one followed them. Or if they did, they stayed invisible. At 138th and Amsterdam, the corner was empty except for a flickering lamppost and a closed bakery. Bumpy parked. Eli's breath came fast. "This is it," he said. "This is where you hand me over." Bumpy opened his door, stepped out, walked around to Eli's side and opened it for him. "Get out," he said. Eli did. The cold bit immediately. Eli looked around, searching for shadows, for movement, for the men who'd promised to be there. Nothing. Bumpy handed him a coat. Eli stared at it. "What is this?" "Your wife's," Bumpy said. "She dropped it earlier." Eli's eyes filled. "You saw her?" "Yes." "When?" "Before the meeting." Eli froze. Understanding crept in slowly, painfully. "You knew," he said. Bumpy nodded once. The trap, the note, the corner, all of it. Eli's voice cracked. "Then why bring me here?" Bumpy looked up at the lamppost, watching snow collect on the glass. "Because they're watching this corner," he said, "and they think they're about to win." A car engine roared somewhere nearby. Too nearby. Bumpy leaned in close, voice low. "When they move," he said, "you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate." Eli's heart hammered. "And my family?" Bumpy met his eyes. "They're already gone." Eli staggered. "Dead." "Safe," Bumpy said. "On a train, south. New names, new start." The engine sound grew louder. Eli's knees nearly buckled. "You planned all this?" he whispered. Bumpy stepped back. "No," he said, "I adapted." Headlights flared at the end of the block. Bumpy raised a hand, not to signal surrender, but timing. "This is where it ends," he said. Eli ran. Behind him, gunfire erupted. Not at Eli, but at the headlights as they swerved, smashed into a parked truck and burst into steam and screams. The corner dissolved into chaos. Eli never looked back. And the men who thought fear had won realized, too late, that they'd just revealed themselves. But if Eli was free, who was about to pay for that freedom? The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had started. Steam hissed from the ruined engine, rising in thick white sheets that swallowed the corner. Someone screamed in pain. Another voice barked orders that no one followed. Bumpy Johnson was already walking away, not running, not celebrating, just moving with purpose, coat collar up, disappearing into the drifting snow before the police sirens arrived. By the time officers flooded 138th Street, they found a wrecked car, 2 wounded men, and a story that didn't add up. No body to pin the night on, no clear shooter, no explanation for why a planned pickup had turned into an ambush. What they did find was panic, because the people who had designed the trap now understood the cost of miscalculation. They had exposed their network. They had revealed their watchers. And they had failed to collect their prize. Eli Rosen reached the train station just before midnight. A man he'd never met pressed tickets into his hand. No names were spoken, no explanations offered. Ruth and Daniel were already there, bundled and frightened, but alive. Ruth's face collapsed when she saw him, not in relief, but in something heavier. "You told me it was finished," she said. Eli couldn't meet her eyes. It never was. The train pulled out 20 minutes later, carrying them toward a future that would always feel borrowed. Eli didn't sleep. He stared at the dark window and understood the real punishment wasn't fear. It was exile. Every skill he'd built, every connection he'd relied on, was now useless. Survival had cost him his identity. Back in Harlem, the consequences arrived faster. The men who'd planned the Lafayette ambush began to disappear. Not dramatically, not all at once. One lost his collectors. Another found his protection gone. A third was arrested on charges he'd paid to bury years earlier. No one claimed responsibility. No message was sent. Which was the message? Lewis Carter stood outside the storefront at dawn, watching workers scrub blood from the floorboards. "They won't try that again," he said. Bumpy shook his head. "They will," he replied. "Just not the same way." Louis hesitated. "You let him go." "Yes. You could have ended it." Bumpy looked down the street, where the night had folded back into ordinary morning. "Ending things is easy," he said. "Living with what you start, that's harder." The city woke up confused but intact. Rumors spread, then shifted, then vanished into new ones. No legend was announced, no victory declared, just absence. Eli Rosen would live. So would the people who threatened him. But the balance had shifted in a way no one could measure yet. Because somewhere between the trap and the escape, a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. And everyone involved now knew the next mistake wouldn't be forgiven. If fear had failed, what would replace it? By the following afternoon, Harlem felt different. Not louder, not quieter, but tighter. Conversations ended when unfamiliar footsteps approached. Shopkeepers lingered in doorways longer than usual. Men who normally traveled with confidence checked reflections in windows, counting shadows behind them. The failed trap had spread without explanation. That was what unsettled people most. No bodies left in the street. No public retaliation. No obvious winner. Just a sudden understanding that a line had been tested and held. The Lafayette Social Club stayed closed for 3 days. When it reopened, the bartender had been replaced. The backroom furniture was gone. Upstairs windows were boarded, the glass swept so clean it looked like nothing had ever happened. That absence spoke louder than a warning. People began recalculating their loyalties, not out of admiration, but out of survival. The men who had backed the ambush found their credit drying up. Suppliers delayed deliveries. Messengers started getting lost. It wasn't punishment. It was isolation. And isolation in Harlem was a slow sentence. Louis Carter noticed it first. "They're drifting," he told Bumpy one evening. "No one wants to be seen standing next to them." Bumpy nodded. "Good." "What about Eli?" Louis asked. Bumpy didn't answer right away. He was looking out the window, watching a group of kids argue over a stickball bat in the street. "They'll tell that story wrong," Louis said. "They'll say he was spared." Bumpy turned. "He wasn't spared," he said. "He was erased." That truth rippled outward. People who'd been considering quiet betrayals thought again. Not because of loyalty, but because the outcome had become unpredictable. The old calculations no longer worked. Fear had been reliable. This was not. The men behind the ambush attempted to reassert control. They sent feelers, proposed meetings, offered apologies disguised as business. None were accepted. Not because they were refused, but because no one showed up. The silence was deliberate. Meanwhile, Eli Rosen's name began to vanish from ledgers and memory. New accounts replaced old ones. Routes were reassigned. The machine adapted without him, cleaner than before. That was the cost of mercy. Late one night, Mr. Finch spoke what others hadn't dared. "You taught them something dangerous," he said. "That betrayal can be survived." Bumpy considered that. "No," he replied. "I taught them it can be survived, but not returned from." Finch frowned. "You think that's enough?" Bumpy didn't answer. Outside, Harlem continued breathing, tense, but alive. The streets adjusted around the absence of open conflict like a body compensating for an old injury. The trap had failed, but it had changed the terrain, and everyone knew the next move wouldn't come from anger or pride, but from something colder, quieter, and harder to see coming. When the rules stop making sense, who decides what comes next? Stop. Wait for next. Part 7. Unexpected Ending Plus. Short CTA, 250 words. 2 months later, a letter arrived at a Harlem post office with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a boy standing on a sunlit platform somewhere far south. No snow, no coats. Just a thin smile, and a hand held tightly by someone cropped out of the frame. On the back, 3 words were written in careful ink. We are safe. Bumpy Johnson held the photo for a long time. Not because it brought relief, but because it confirmed the cost. Eli Rosen would never come back. Not to Harlem. Not to the life he understood. He had chosen survival, and survival had taken everything else with it. His son would grow up with a new name, never knowing why his father flinched at certain sounds or avoided mirrors. And the men who had built the trap, they survived too. Some of them even prospered for a while. But they never trusted clean plans again. Every meeting felt compromised. Every quiet room felt staged. They spent more energy watching each other than moving forward. That was the irony. The trap failed instantly, but its damage lingered. Not in blood, in doubt. Bumpy folded the photograph and placed it in a drawer he rarely opened. He didn't keep trophies, he kept reminders. Because winning once doesn't end conflict. It only teaches everyone what the next mistake will cost. If you want stories where plans collapse, choices matter, and survival carries a price, stay with us. The next one starts with a knock at the door and someone who shouldn't have been there. Subscribe. Because the quiet moments are where the truth hides.